Gosh, we're coming up to mid-July now, and I hope you're all keeping well. I hope life is being good to you, and so on. Weather's quite nice here. I hope it's nice where you are. Still doesn't feel like summer, but it feels like a nice spring. I don't like the heat anyway, so I'm not particularly bothered. So, a guy I used to work with, nice fella, English chap, lives over here. Hadn't seen him in a while, fully jabbed. He's just falling apart. He's just falling apart. He looked so bad. And he's only a few years older than me. He could be my granddad. He is just falling apart. He's having all kinds of eye problems, nervous problems, everything. He's just not working. He's just breaking down, and he looks terrible, and he sounds terrible. And I'm seeing this everywhere now. The deterioration is phenomenally unsettling. On top of that, we have this massive cognitive decay, this massive cognitive breakdown, where people are just losing their intelligence. And it's not just at the top, at the bottom, I mean, it's at the top as well. It's at all strata of society. Like, the only reason I'm convinced now that Putin hasn't attacked the West yet is because he knows that the West is run by lunatics, and it wouldn't, he probably is just as flabbergasted as the rest of us at the state of these people. I have an article I wrote this morning. NATO and the EU really thinks it can defeat, Russia with rainbow flags and Greta Thunberg and Joe Biden's Alzheimer's. That's literally what NATO is like now. The West seems to have no understanding of what war actually is. They have no concept of contingency in terms of planning public works other than hiring NGOs and paying journalists off to spout pro-politician, pro-government propaganda. It's amazing. The madness of it all is so amazing, it's hard to believe. But here we are, there's just a general breakdown of intelligence everywhere. Are we devolving? It's almost like the concept, when the alchemists the magicians and the sorcerers in the past tried to create homunculus, the life. There was one case in the 1700s of one German aristocrat who managed to create these beings that were alive in jars of water, but they were more fish-like than human, but they were people. They were human, but more fish-like. They're probably like the Innsmouth residents. And that seems to be what we're going back to. Not us. The normies, the NPCs are going back to. They're degenerating back into some kind of primitive life form. And common sense means nothing. It's very easy to say, oh, they're all pinned on dogma and all this stuff. But even ones who are pinned on dogma, they don't have that lack of common sense. The Bolsheviks didn't defeat the Third Reich on dogma alone. They understood that they had to build a war machine, and they had to have industry, and they had to have a proper military. But the ones we have today don't understand that. They literally think that they think that they can solve problems through behaviors, not through actually tackling the problem. So the immigration issue, what you do is you say far right harder. You call more and more people far right. You don't actually address that they might have concerns, or there might be bottlenecks in the healthcare or education or housing system because the Western countries are being flooded with people. No, you just call people far right, and you do it more and more. Well, this goes on to every aspect of their existence. The bad man Putin, orange man bad. They can't, it's not that they're fanatics so much, it's that they don't have the reason. This is what I find amazing about it. They said they were getting rid of religion in order to go into a world of reason. But they don't even have reason. They've got less reason now than they had when they were religious. This is what I find remarkable. You know, they see the countryside as nothing more than an inhibitor for putting up more solar and wind farms. And then they'll say, where will the food come from? And they go, oh, I didn't think of that. This is what they're like. At the top of bureaucracy, the civil service, the mainstream media, this is what they're like. Instead of saying Joe Biden is, has dementia and he should be taken down, they put up with it. They deal with it. They can't admit, they're like children, they can't admit defeat. It's like there's an immaturity thing as well where I think, a part of being an adult and maturing as a person, part of being an adult and maturing as a person is being able to admit defeat, to negotiate, to, moderate, mediate. You see, like, your man Starmer in England there yesterday saying he's going to pledge minimum of £3 billion a year to Ukraine, no matter what. No matter what. And you had, like, Justin Trudeau say, we're with us to the end. To the end of what? The end of the world? These people have no concept of negotiation. Well, we saw that during the Rona and everything. But I was just looking at that guy I used to work with, and he's a symbol of what the West is right now. A man who's dying before his time. The West is dying before its time because no one has the balls to actually turn around and say it's all wrong. Well, they do, but they're called far right or conspiracy theorists. And there's definitely an element of suicidal oblivion there. There's definitely an element that, like, they wanted to die. Many want to die. There was a huge BDSM element among the needlecraft and the masks and all that. And I never realized how much BDSM is a fetish among normies and NPCs. But the ultimate BDSM fetish would be the destruction of the earth through atomic war. That would really turn them on. That's what's, I think, a huge part of this drive as well. That there's, like, the whole thing, like, years ago when I worked on Wall Street, I was told about this place where they says, and the guy was telling me that, I think the conversation, it led to kind of call girls and brothels around, prostitutes working like the high level on Wall Street. And I got around to talking to it because I had no experience of it. I didn't know about it or anything like that. I mean, I knew it existed, but I didn't know the peculiarities of it. And there was a guy there called Nino, his mates, and he was telling me all about it. And he says, what the biggest thing around here is? He goes, there's brothels that these super wealthy guys go in and they get beaten up by dominatrix. And he goes, and he was telling me about it, and he goes, you wouldn't believe these places. This is like, they're really well set up. Like, and you'd have, like, fellas, dominatrix dressed like SS guards, and they would have little trains, like a little train inside the S&M place where you got onto the train and she whipped you out and put him in a gas chamber. And I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, they all, or else whipped the slaves and made to pick cotton. And these were all super rich guys from, and I goes, how is, I says, how is, okay, I said, like, I'd understand, a sexy girl dressed up in, like, fishnet stockings and a kind of a kinky version of a Nazi. I could understand that being turned on by that. But I says, what about the rest of them? And he says, they've had no hardship in their lives. And to them, he goes, we had hardship. He was from a working class Italian American background. And he goes, yeah, we had tough times growing up. We got beat up in school. There was gangs. There was, you had problems with your parents. Money wasn't always there. So he says they never had that problem. They had everything they ever wanted from the time they were kids, babies. No hardship in life. Everything was fixed or taken care of. And they have this sexual need, dysfunctionality, perversion, where they're turned on by pain and suffering because they've never experienced real hardship. And then later on, when I started to understand psychology, I understand it as well. Now, amazingly, years later, when I was back in Ireland, there was a John Ronson, I think it was, did a documentary at Channel 4 about the sex industry in America. And believe it or not, he actually brought the cameras to this place down in Lower Manhattan where the women would dress up as Nazis and they would gas people, hedge fund managers, pretend to gas them to turn them on and this kind of thing. And so that turned out to be true, that story. Well, the way he told me, I believed him. I just didn't realize it was so complex as what it was. Well, that was back then in the 90s. Now we have the whole Western society, which hasn't suffered. There hasn't been any suffering really as a whole in Western society. You know, from like the generation, what was the generation now? The Generation X. So generations, the ones after that, the ones who grew up in the early 2000s and so on, they've always had what they wanted because money was cheap and credit was cheap. So they never had hardships, even if they were in working class communities. They had way much more than what I had growing up. So they've had everything. They've no hardship. So you wonder if this desire to destroy everything from being injected and with the needlecraft and the lockdowns, if there was a big BDSM element to all that. And by extension, is the ultimate BDSM element for these idle Westerners death by Russian hypersonic missiles. Human psychology still plays an enormous part in all this stuff. And we don't have any stewardships. We don't have. When was the last time you saw a great thinker on TV or radio? In the past you had people like Gore Vidal. You had people like that. You were like kind of like great social, Malcolm Muggeridge. You had these great social commentators, who would appear on the media or write articles in papers, and every country and every community had them, where it was a social comment. They were almost like the bards of the time. They didn't sing, they wrote. Where are they today? They're nowhere. There's no social commentators commentating on anything. All you have is polemics, dogmatists and polemics, and there's no sort of like mediation or mulling it over or stuff like that. There's even no concept of the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. You know that song by Sting, from The Dream of the Blue Turtles? If the Russians, I hope the Russians love their children too. How can I save my little boy from Oppenheimer's deadly toy? And the whole notion of the song was that, it's only normal human compassion that prevents us from annihilation. And if hope lies anywhere, it lies in the hope of ordinary people on both sides of the Cold War. A lot of truth to that actually turned out to be true. But we don't have that thinking anymore. It's like, if a song like that came out today, we'd say it'd be like kill the Russians and their children. That's what it would be like today. I think, it's John Waters always says, where are the adults? Indeed, where are the adults? And you don't have old souls. None. We're not running the system anymore. You don't have that anymore. So, it's, when I meet like that chap I told you about I met this morning, it's brought home to me more and more that humanity is split in two. And we and tribe-minded people like us, and I have to be careful with using this language because I don't want to sound chauvinistic or cultish, that we're somehow a great elite, because that's how they think. People like us, we're sort of like, we're dissidents who've walked away. And I say, I'm not putting up with this shit. I'm not putting up with this crap. And there's no answers. There's no answers that we can do at some global level and say, well, this is how we're going to fix it. Someone suggested boycotting last week, boycotting the media, not buying newspapers and stuff like that. That doesn't work because the newspapers are now basically a public utility. They're funded by the taxpayers. No matter, take the Irish Times. If everyone in Ireland boycotted the Irish Times, it would still make a profit. It would still be fine, and all the staff would be paid and everything, and they'd get bonuses because it comes out of public coffers. It comes out of government money. Then they do it indirectly by buying advertising and stuff like that inside it, but they also give money as well, direct cash for their to get their opinions, and that's the mass media today. You know, you look at like the Sun newspaper was boycotted in Liverpool, right, because of what happened at Hillsborough, and you cannot get a copy of the Sun anywhere in the Liverpool area. But guess what? The Sun survived, and it's still powerful. So there's boycotts that, you know, in the normal, in a normal capitalistic system, boycotts would work. But we don't have a normal capitalistic system anymore. We have basically everybody's on the public coffers. The government buys everything. Even the corporations, through their not paying taxes, are sort of like public services as well. Well, they're part of the public sector is a better way, not services. They're part of the public sector. And this all crept in with the PPPs. Remember them, public-private partnerships? That was basically fascism. What the idea of a PPP was that the government would pay for the infrastructure, and then a company would operate it. In theory, a good idea, but the PPPs just became a way to supply companies with free stuff. Like for instance, they build a tram line they build a tram line or a metro in a city, right? And they use public money to buy it and pay for it, and then they hand it over to someone like Transdev or Aviva or some other company. It just, Connex, just to run it, and they all they have to do is show up and collect the profits. It's just a beautiful scam, isn't it? But there you have it. That's how everything works like that now. So boycotts are irrelevant. Boycotts are completely irrelevant at this point. Unless you micromanage them in a local area. And that returns me to my old thing of no contact ever again, which comes from a Slavic banishment concept. It's actually kind of folk magic. That if someone in a town was causing problems, they would banish them. And how they would banish them was be acknowledge that they weren't allowed. I bet the Slavs are really good at that. But the whole thing, like, what does a Slavic woman look like when she's depressed? What does a Slavic woman look like when it's the happiest day of her life? So they'd be good at that. So you'd have that situation, where you would just do that, so you could just ignore them. But I'm starting to do that. I'm sure lots of you are. When you talk about it's too many people out there, it's too peoply. More and more, I'm banishing myself from society. I will make every excuse not to go shopping. Like you shouldn't do it, but it's a way of avoiding people. I needed a new sketchbook this week, an A4 sketchbook. And I could have went to the art shop and bought one. I should have went to the art shop and bought one. But to avoid being around people, I just ordered one off the internet. And it came the next day. And I felt better. I felt good about it because I didn't have to deal with the general public. So maybe that's the answer, is that we just dissolve away from society as best we can. Now people will say, well, that's not going to help society as a whole. I don't give a fuck. I'm not a Christian. I'm not here to save anybody. Or just myself and my loved ones. I don't give a fuck about the rest of the world. I mean, that's the Christian mindset, the Christian mindset of like, you have to save everybody. Fuck that shit. I'm not doing that. I mean, that's a psyop in itself. That means that you take energy from yourself and you hand it over to others. That's why Christianity, one of the many reasons Christianity has been a curse on Western people, and that's one of them. That everyone has to be a savior of everyone else. This is what, I mean, you can draw a direct line of correlation from, the little black baby shaking the money boxes here in Ireland, in Africa, to 500 military-aged men living next door to your granny. Direct line from that. This idea we have to save others. We have to take up thy bed and give it to the stranger. Do you see now why I don't like Christianity? Love thy neighbour, turn the other cheek. And you see now why I don't like it. and why our pagan ancestors, when it was put to them that way, they were shocked. You'd actually tell them we should love people who want to destroy us? Yes, because you get to heaven. You go through the pearly gates. And we're surrounded by the results of this whole thing. And it's been weaponized now into evil through virtue signaling, where virtue signaling doesn't even do anything to help anybody, but just the actual thing of boasting about I'm the most godly. It's a secular version of plenary indulgences, really, when you think about it, where they, instead of trading sins in the afterlife, they train virtues on this earth. And look, and by the way, if you're a Christian, that's your own business. I'm not putting you down there. However your religion is, that's your own business. But I mean, it hasn't been on the whole. See, this whole thing is that the greatest lie ever is the Judeo-Christian society. The West was not founded by Judeo-Christianity. The West was founded by paganism. Greece and Rome, the foundations of philosophy, the arts, science, engineering, were all founded by men and women who believed that gods lived in trees and goddesses lived in lakes, and who believed the natural world was filled with animism and living things. Not just animals, but there were spirits in everything. And they're the ones who built the incredible structures of ancient Greece and Rome. And laid down the foundations through, Western civilization, Archimedean, Platonic, Pythagorean, theatre, arts, everything, you name it. And then the Judeo-Christians came along and stole it and said it's ours. That's what happened there. This is paganism built the West, and it's Christianity through its final stage of virtue signaling and mass migration that's destroying it. And maybe that was the plan from the start. Take care.